Welcome to Ditch Auto. My name's Jared, and today we're going to take a look at a new lens from Sony. This is for their full frame mirrorless platform. This is the 35mm FE f1.4 with Zeiss coating. It is a fantastic lens. Now, in past videos and also in blogs that I've written, I've talked about how I love the Sony platform. I switched over from Canon, but one of the things that I haven't liked is the fact that all of the lenses that I use are f4 lenses. That means the maximum aperture that the lens will go to is an f4. Now, that's not so big of a deal because of the fact that these cameras are really good in low light, which a lot of times that's why you might want a wider aperture, is to help your camera perform better in low light. That's one of the main reasons why I always bought really fast glass for my Canon cameras, f1.2, f1.4, lenses that would just let in a lot of light so that I can take better pictures in the dark. So with these cameras, they don't need as much of that help. A lot of the early lenses that came out for these mirrorless cameras are f4. They don't go wider than that. So you also lose a little bit on that depth of field, like that shallow depth of field that you get from lenses that are that wide, which is another reason why a lot of people buy those lenses. Having that fall off of focus is just beautiful and produces a fantastic photo. And I was losing some of that with some of these lenses. So when Sony announced this lens earlier this year, I was super excited and I pre-ordered it right away because a 35mm focal length is a focal length that I use quite often. A lot of times I would be shooting with a 24-70, but most of the time I'm somewhere right around that 35mm taking a lot of photos. So now having a faster lens that's gonna allow me to open up that aperture to a maximum of 1.4, I'm gonna be able to get much more separation between my foreground and my background. The background is just gonna be able to blur out so smoothly, and that's one of the things that I really like about these faster lenses. So this lens, nonetheless, is a welcomed tool to my camera bag. So let's talk a little bit about this lens. Now, most prime lenses, fixed focal length lenses, are smaller. However, this lens is quite large. It is actually bigger than the 24-70 zoom lens that I have. So a lens that has internal, it zooms between 24 and 70 millimeters is actually smaller lens than this one, and a bit lighter as well. However, this lens performs extremely well. It's not super heavy, it's actually really lightweight, so that's not really that big of a deal. One of the other things that I thought was going to be really cool to have is the ability to manually adjust your aperture using this aperture ring. Now, Sony calls it a responsive aperture ring because it's not a true aperture ring like on cinema lenses and also full manual lenses. I have a full manual lens, and the aperture ring on it actually adjusts the aperture. Now what this is doing is it's electronically adjusting the aperture, because you can go into auto mode, A for auto, which allows you to control your aperture using your camera the way that we're familiar with. Most of us adjust the aperture or the f-stop of our lens with the camera. However, this lens has a ring that allows you to do it. Now, when you're shooting video, one of the cool things that you can use this for is to adjust your exposure on the fly. You can make changes to your f-stop by adjusting the ring. That's normally a really cool thing, but on this lens, it's not so cool because if you've ever shot video before with your DSLR or one of these Sony cameras, when you change the f-stop on your camera while you're shooting, you see a stepping, like the light steps down, or stops down is the term, but the light it steps. It's not a smooth transition. And it's the same thing with this ring, because this ring is actually doing it electronically. This ring is not attached to the iris of the camera, it's electronically making the adjustment. Sony's done a really good job, don't get me wrong. It's much smoother than any lens I've ever seen before that does this electronically. However, it's not nearly as smooth as a lens that was able to do this fully manually, non-electronically, meaning that this ring is directly attached to the iris inside the camera, and when you rotate it, it's physically rotating or physically opening or closing the iris inside of the lens. So for me, I thought it was going to be a really cool feature. However, it's not really going to be that cool of a feature because for photographers, this doesn't make that big of a difference because we can adjust the aperture, right in our camera in between shots. It's more of a feature for people shooting video where you might want to, maybe you're going from an inside shot to an outside shot, and inside you're at f2 because you need more light, and as you go outside and the light starts to get really bright, you feather down, basically stop down and close that iris so that it kind of feathers the light, and then you're able to, just gradually work into a proper exposure for outdoor. Super cool, because obviously adding an ND filter or different things like that is a disruption. There's no real easy way to just add ND to the front of your lens. So this is a super cool feature. It's just not, if you were to go and film, and I'll put an example up, when you're filming and you are doing this, and say we're starting out at f2, and then as I'm moving towards needing to darken my exposure, maybe going outside, I'm adjusting this. And you could see it stepping. You could see it stepping through the process. It's not extremely smooth like it would be if it was fully manual. So nonetheless, that's not a deal breaker for me because I bought this lens, yes, to use for video as well, but definitely to use for photography. So that issue is not a big deal. Maybe if this ring wasn't there at all, the lens could have been a little smaller, which would have been nice, but I'm not complaining. It's still kind of a neat feature to have. It's better to have it there and have it be okay as a feature than to not have it at all, in my opinion. So this lens is just beautiful. It produces a really beautiful kind of, the term everybody uses is bokeh, but the focus fall off is just extremely smooth and beautiful when shooting wide open at 1.4, and then closed down as tight as it'll get at f16 also works really well. Just produces beautifully sharp images. I try to test lenses in a variety of different ways. Issues that I typically have with lenses is chromatic aberration, which happens when the foreground and the background, the contrast is too high, and you end up getting a fringe around your subject or whatever object it is that you're focused on. And that can either be typically typically a green or a purple fringe around the outside of that. And so trying to reproduce a situation, obviously this lens does fall prey to that if you push it hard enough, where your subject is maybe much darker and the background is super bright. You're gonna end up with some sort of chromatic aberration, but it does a great job of preventing it. Distortion, this lens barely has any of that. And with wider lenses, you typically run into issues like that. You're taking a picture of a building and the building curves and you have to fix that in Photoshop or Lightroom, and it's always kind of a pain. Good lenses like this perform very well, and this lens is no different. Distortion is, you really have to try to distort something by taking a weird angle, photo at a weird angle or something like that. It does an excellent job of taking pictures of buildings and things that typically might be a little bit off. And there isn't yet, at the time of me recording this, a lens profile in Adobe Lightroom. There probably will be within the next couple of weeks. So any little bits of distortion or any issues like that, the camera profile or the lens profile will take care of it completely. I'm very confident in that fact. So this is a 72 millimeter ring on the front of this. So if you needed to add filters or anything like that, you could. Definitely a common size, especially among other Sony lenses that I have. So it's nice to know. There are a couple of Sony lenses that I have that are odd filter thread sizes, which means I probably won't buy any filters because I won't be able to use those filters on a variety of my lenses. However, 72 millimeter, very common filter thread size, lots of options available. So that's a fantastic thing as well. Comes with a lens hood. The lens hood, very common to most of the other, or similar to the other Sony lenses. I like the lens hood. It's very good quality. Goes on nicely. Doesn't fall off. Not easy to lose it, which is good. And then the cap works both with this on and off, which is also a nice option. So other features of this lens that I really liked, I mean, like I said, I mostly bought it because I don't have hardly any lenses for the Sony platform that are as fast as this, f1.4. And you also can worry about lenses that are that fast, because sometimes their image is not that sharp at 1.4. Maybe the image ends up being its best at f3 or f2.8 or something like that. So chances are with a lot of lenses that you run into that issue. However, in testing this lens, taking photos at a variety of different f-stops, the photos looked fantastic, very sharp, edge to edge, without any issues or any vignetting around the edges, which can definitely happen with wider lenses such as a 35mm. So overall, this lens is just performing fantastically. Now, I also have some sample photos. I know I've put some sample photos in this video throughout. There's also some sample photos over at ditchauto.com where you can see the photo in a little bit better quality and kind of judge it for yourself, as well as read up what I wrote about the lens, which essentially is what I've said in this video, but there's some other details. I kind of go more into technical specs in the product review than anywhere else. So if you're looking for a lens, maybe you have the same problem that I've had with Sony. The lenses just aren't very fast as far as the aperture goes. This is an alternative. This is definitely something that you need to add to your bag. Lastly, talking about autofocus, the autofocus inside this lens is completely silent. I was only able to hear the sound that autofocus was making by pressing my ear up against the side of the lens. I can hear something very quietly, like ultrasonic, happening inside of the lens. Could barely hear the lens. Really, the only noise that you ever hear this lens make is when you turn it on, turn the camera on. Usually you hear kind of the focal range going. It just kind of racks from one side to the other, and you might hear that. But nonetheless, I hear nothing with this lens, which is fantastic, because with these Sony cameras, I'm shooting a lot of video, I'm shooting a lot of photo, and especially with video, we need quiet lenses that perform well. I'm super excited to have this lens in the future. In the near future, I will be testing this lens out more with shooting video on the Sony a7S, as well as having some opportunities to take even more photos and have more fun with this lens. So definitely check it out. There's links below this video to where you can find this lens, as well as more details about it. If you have any questions, let me know, and feel free to join our Facebook group where we talk about photography, camera gear, and all that fun stuff at facebook.com/groups/ditchauto. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.